Waitress yelled, "Get down!" and took the bullet meant for the Hell's Angel. The morning sun peeked through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the weathered linoleum floor. Marge adjusted her name tag, smoothing down her crisp uniform as she had done countless times before. The familiar weight of her apron settled around her waist as she tied it with practiced hands. The diner was her second home, a place where memories lived in every corner. 10 years had passed since Tom's death, but some mornings she could still picture him sitting at the counter, sipping his black coffee and telling her about his plans for the day. She blinked away the thought, focusing instead on wiping down the already clean counter. "Morning, Marge," called out Earl, one of her regulars, as he pushed through the glass door. The little bell chimed cheerfully above him. "Good morning, Earl. The usual?" Marge's smile came easily, warming her entire face. She grabbed the coffee pot before he could answer, pouring him a steaming cup just the way he liked it. More customers trickled in as the morning progressed. Betty and her granddaughter took their usual booth by the window. The Thompson twins, both retired teachers, settled into their spots at the counter. Each familiar face brought comfort, like pieces of a well-worn quilt stitched together by time and routine. As she refilled coffee cups and took orders, Marge thought about her own children. Sarah was teaching in Arizona now, and Michael had his hands full with his accounting firm in Seattle. The photos they sent of her grandchildren were precious, but they weren't quite the same as having them close by. The door chimed again, and Jack Malone's broad frame filled the entrance. His leather jacket was worn at the edges, and his gray hair was slightly disheveled from his motorcycle helmet. Despite his imposing presence, Marge had always seen something gentle in his eyes. "Morning, Jack," she called out, already reaching for a clean mug. "Cold one out there today." "Sure is, Marge." His voice was gruff but kind. He settled onto his usual stool at the counter, the one slightly apart from the other customers. Old habits died hard, she supposed. "The usual?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Jack had been ordering the same breakfast for months now. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, and a side of hash browns. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You know me too well." As she placed his order with the kitchen, Marge noticed how the other regulars had grown accustomed to Jack's presence. When he'd first started coming in, there had been whispers about his past with the Hell's Angels. Now he was just another part of their morning routine. "Coffee's fresh," she said, filling his mug. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, she saw what she always saw in Jack. Not the tough exterior or the rumors that followed him, but a man looking for his place in the world, just like everyone else. They shared a quiet moment as the buzz of conversation filled the diner around them. The griddle sizzled in the kitchen, plates clattered, and the old ceiling fans whirred overhead. These were the sounds of home, of belonging, and Marge knew that even Jack, with all his rough edges, felt it too. The morning rush continued, and Marge moved efficiently between tables, topping off coffee cups and taking orders. The diner was filling up now as the lunch crowd began to arrive, mixing with the remaining breakfast regulars. Through it all, she kept one eye on Jack, making sure his coffee stayed hot and his breakfast was just right. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now, back to the story. The afternoon sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Marge moved between tables with practiced ease, her sensible shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum. The lunch crowd was starting to thin out, but several regulars remained, nursing their coffee cups and sharing stories about their day. "Here's your apple pie, Earl," Marge said, setting the plate in front of a retired mailman. "Made it fresh this morning." Her eyes crinkled with warmth as she topped off his coffee. Jack sat at the counter, his broad shoulders hunched over a plate of meatloaf. He picked at his food, lost in thought, while Marge kept a watchful eye on him. She'd noticed he seemed more withdrawn than usual today. "Everything all right with the meatloaf, Jack?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He looked up, offering a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's good, Marge, just like always." Outside, across the street, a figure in dark clothing stood partially hidden behind a parked car. His presence went unnoticed by most of the diner's occupants, but old Tom, seated by the window, felt something off about the stranger's stillness. The afternoon light caught on something metallic in the stranger's hands. Tom squinted, trying to make out what it was, when his coffee cup suddenly slipped from his trembling fingers and shattered on the floor. "Oh, don't you worry about that," Marge said, already reaching for the broom. "Accidents happen." The sound of breaking ceramic drew Jack's attention to the window. His weathered face paled as his eyes locked with the stranger's cold gaze. In that split second, years of street instinct kicked in, but before he could react, Marge happened to glance up from her sweeping. Time seemed to slow down. Marge saw the glint of metal across the street. She saw the dark figure raise his arm. She saw Jack, vulnerable and exposed on his counterstool. In that moment, all her years of caring for others, of putting others first, crystallized into a single action. "Get down!" Marge's voice cut through the peaceful diner atmosphere like a knife. She dropped the broom and lunged toward Jack, her arms outstretched. The window exploded inward with a deafening crack. Glass shards sparkled in the air like deadly diamonds. Marge's body collided with Jack's, sending them both tumbling to the floor behind the counter. The bullet meant for Jack's heart found a different target. Screams erupted throughout the diner. Cups and plates crashed to the floor as customers dove for cover. Earl, the retired mailman, was already on his phone calling 911, his voice shaking but determined. "Marge?" Jack's voice was thick with disbelief as he cradled her in his arms. A dark stain was spreading across her powder blue uniform. "Marge, why did you do that?" She looked up at him, her face pale but peaceful. "Couldn't let anything happen to one of my regulars, could I?" she whispered, trying to smile through the pain. The wail of approaching sirens filled the air. The diner's regulars huddled around Marge and Jack, forming a protective circle. Someone had grabbed clean towels from the kitchen, pressing them against her wound. The sound of running footsteps indicated the shooter had fled, but no one was paying attention to that now. All eyes were on Marge, their beloved waitress, who had just risked everything to save a former Hell's Angel. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow in the emergency room as Jack sat beside Marge's still form. His large, calloused hands trembled as he looked at her pale face, the steady beep of monitors the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Tubes and wires connected her to machines that seemed to dwarf her small frame. "I'm so sorry, Marge," he whispered, his gruff voice catching. "This should have been me lying there." The pristine white hospital sheets made her look even more fragile. Jack's weathered face creased with worry as he watched her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. The bullet had struck her in the shoulder, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. The doctors had worked for hours to remove it and repair the damage. A paper cup of cold coffee sat untouched on the side table. Jack hadn't moved from his chair since they'd let him in. His motorcycle jacket was stained with her blood from when he'd held her in the diner, waiting for the ambulance. He couldn't bring himself to take it off. It felt like some kind of penance. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it happen again. The flash of movement at the diner's entrance. Marge's face changing as she spotted the danger. Her voice crying out. The way she'd launched herself at him without hesitation. The sound of the gunshot. The terrible moment when he realized she'd taken the bullet meant for him. "Why'd you do it, Marge?" he asked the quiet room. "Someone like me, I'm not worth it." His past felt like a weight around his neck, dragging him down. All those years with the angels, the violence, the choices he'd made, they'd finally caught up with him. But instead of paying the price himself, this kind woman who'd only ever shown him kindness was paying it for him. A nurse entered, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. She checked Marge's vitals and made notes on her chart. "How is she?" Jack asked, his voice rough with emotion. The nurse gave him a gentle smile. "Her condition is critical but stable. The next 24 hours will be crucial, but she's fighting hard." She adjusted one of Marge's IV bags. "Are you family?" Jack shook his head. "No, I'm just—" He trailed off, unsure how to explain what Marge meant to him. She was his waitress, yes, but also the only person who'd looked at him and seen something worth saving. "I'm just someone she helped." "Well, she's lucky to have you here," the nurse said kindly. "Talk to her. Sometimes patients can hear us even when they're unconscious." After the nurse left, Jack leaned forward in his chair. His fingers, rough from years of working on motorcycles, gently touched Marge's hand. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere. I owe you my life, Marge, and I swear I'm going to make this right." The machines continued their steady beeping as Jack settled in for his vigil. Outside the window, day turned to night and back again, but he remained. Hospital staff came and went, checking vitals, changing IVs, but Jack was a constant presence. He only left the room when forced to, and then just for minutes at a time. Days passed this way, each hour marked by the rhythm of machines and the quiet murmur of hospital activity beyond the door. Jack stayed, waiting, hoping, and praying in his own rough way for the woman who'd risked everything to save him. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as Marge's eyelids fluttered open. The white hospital ceiling came into focus, and she became aware of the steady beeping of monitors nearby. Her chest ached, and her mouth felt dry. Turning her head slightly, she saw Jack slumped in a chair beside her bed, his usually tough exterior showing signs of wear. Dark circles hung under his eyes, and his clothes were wrinkled as if he'd been wearing them for days. "Jack?" Her voice came out as a whisper. His head snapped up, eyes widening. "Marge?" He leaned forward, his weathered hands clasping the bed rail. "Thank God you're awake." She tried to smile, though it took effort. "You look terrible." A short laugh escaped him, more relief than humor. "You're the one in the hospital bed, and you're worried about how I look?" "Someone has to," she said softly. The simple act of talking made her tired, but she needed him to understand. "I'd do it again, you know." Jack's face darkened. "Don't say that. You shouldn't have done it in the first place. I'm not worth—" "Stop right there," Marge interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "Every single person is worth saving, Jack Malone. Even tough old bikers who don't think so themselves." Tears welled in Jack's eyes, something she'd never seen before. He quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. "I don't understand why you'd risk your life for someone like me." "Because that's what people do for people they care about," she said simply. "And like it or not, you're family now." The word family seemed to hit Jack hard. He sat back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've been sitting here for days, trying to figure out how to thank you. Everything I think of seems inadequate." "Then don't thank me," Marge said. "Just promise me you'll stop carrying all that guilt around. It's too heavy, and it's time to let it go." 3 days later, the doctor signed Marge's discharge papers. Jack stood beside her wheelchair, required by hospital policy, even though Marge insisted she could walk. She held her personal belongings in a small bag on her lap, while Jack pushed her through the hospital corridors. "My truck's right out front," he said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "I fixed up the passenger seat with extra cushions." "You didn't have to do that," Marge protested. "Yeah, I did," he replied firmly. Outside, the spring air felt fresh against Marge's face. Jack's old pickup truck sat waiting, freshly washed, another small gesture that touched her heart. He helped her up into the cab with careful hands, making sure she was comfortable before closing the door. As they pulled away from the hospital, Marge noticed how Jack drove more carefully than usual, avoiding every bump and pothole. The man who once terrorized these streets on his motorcycle was now treating his truck like it was carrying precious cargo. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence, "this doesn't mean you have to babysit me." Jack kept his eyes on the road, but his expression softened. "I know, but I want to help. Let me do this, Marge." She reached over and patted his arm, understanding the deeper meaning behind his words. There was something different between them now, a bond forged in those frightening moments at the diner, strengthened by his vigilant presence during her hospital stay. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more profound, like finding family in an unexpected place. The afternoon sun filtered through Marge's living room window, casting a warm glow on her as she sat propped up against pillows on her worn but comfortable couch. A quilted blanket covered her legs, and her favorite book rested in her lap. The quiet of her home was broken by a gentle knock at the door. "Come in, Jack," she called out, knowing his familiar pattern of 3 soft raps. Jack entered, carrying a paper bag that filled the room with the aroma of homemade chicken soup. His large frame seemed almost out of place among Marge's delicate decorations and family photos, but his gentle movements showed his careful consideration of the space. "Made this myself," he said, setting the bag down on the coffee table. "My mother's recipe." Marge's eyes crinkled with a smile. "I didn't know you could cook." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Marge." His voice was quiet, heavy with meaning. He settled into the armchair across from her, his hands clasped together, fingers working nervously. "Well, I've got nothing but time right now," Marge said, marking her place in her book and setting it aside. "Why don't you tell me?" Jack was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the window. "I've done things, Marge. Bad things. The kind of things that make a man wonder if he deserves someone taking a bullet for him." "Everyone deserves a second chance, Jack." He shook his head, a bitter smile crossing his face. "The Hells Angels, they weren't just a motorcycle club for me. They were family, or what I thought was family." He rubbed his hands together, lost in memories. "We'd roll into towns, cause trouble, sometimes worse than trouble. I earned my nickname, the Hammer, and not for any good reasons." Marge listened quietly, her face showing concern but no judgment. "I've got a daughter," Jack continued, his voice catching. "Haven't seen her in 15 years. Her mother took her and ran after she saw what I'd become. Can't say I blame her." "It's never too late to make things right, Jack," Marge said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. "That bullet was meant for me, Marge. My past catching up. And you?" He looked at her, his eyes glistening. "You could have died because of my mistakes." "But I didn't," Marge said firmly. "I'm right here, and maybe this happened for a reason. Maybe it's time to stop running from your past and face it head on." Jack stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. "I don't even know where to start." "Start small," Marge suggested. "Start with today." He turned back to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw determination replace the guilt in his eyes. "I'm going to make this right, Marge. I promise you that. What you did for me, I'm going to make sure it wasn't for nothing." That's all anyone can ask, Jack. He picked up his jacket and headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'll be back tomorrow. Need to make sure you're eating that soup. I'll be here, Marge said, smiling. Thank you, he said quietly, and they both knew he meant for more than just listening. He left, closing the door softly behind him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of the Hope Harbor Youth Shelter as Jack pulled up on his motorcycle. His heavy boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way to the entrance, his shoulders tense. Through the glass doors, he could see kids lounging on worn sofas, some playing cards, others just staring into space. The shelter's director, Mrs. Chen, greeted him with a warm but cautious smile. Mr. Malone, thank you for coming. We could really use help with our heating system. Jack nodded, his weathered face serious. Just point me in the right direction, ma'am. He followed her through narrow hallways, noting the peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. The basement door creaked as they descended into a musty space where an ancient furnace sat grumbling. As Jack worked on the furnace, rolling up his sleeves and revealing faded tattoos, a teenage boy wandered down to watch. The kid had that look Jack recognized all too well, angry at the world, ready to fight it. You know anything about engines? Jack asked, without looking up from his work. A little, the boy muttered, keeping his distance. Come here, Jack said, his voice gruff but not unkind. I'll show you how this works. For the next hour, Jack explained the furnace's inner workings, sharing stories about his motorcycle repair shop. More kids drifted down, drawn by his straight talk and practical knowledge. When one boy mentioned his older brother was in a gang, Jack put down his wrench and looked him in the eye. Let me tell you something about that life, he said, his voice heavy with experience. It ain't what you think it is. Spent 20 years running with the Angels, and all I got to show for it is regret and people wanting me dead. The kids listened, really listened, as Jack spoke about choices and consequences. He didn't sugarcoat anything, but he offered something they rarely got, honest hope from someone who'd walked their path. By afternoon, the furnace was humming properly, and Jack had promised to return to teach basic motorcycle maintenance to anyone interested. Mrs. Chen's earlier caution had melted into genuine appreciation. Later that day, Jack pushed open the diner's door, the familiar bell chiming above. Marge sat at her usual spot at the counter, still moving carefully but looking stronger. Her face lit up when she saw him, noting the grease still under his fingernails and the satisfied look in his eyes. How'd it go at the shelter? She asked, pouring him a cup of coffee without being asked. Jack wrapped his hands around the warm mug. Fixed their furnace, he said simply, then added, talked to some kids, rough bunch, but... He paused, searching for words. Maybe I can help them avoid my mistakes. Marge reached across the counter and patted his arm. You're doing good, Jack. Those kids need someone who understands them. Don't know about that, he mumbled, but his eyes showed a glimmer of pride. Just trying to make things right, you know. That's all any of us can do, Marge said softly, her eyes crinkling with warmth. One day at a time. They sat in comfortable silence, the diner's regular sounds washing over them, coffee percolating, plates clinking, the quiet murmur of conversation. Through the window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, a gentle end to a day of new beginnings. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn linoleum floor. Marge sat at her usual spot behind the counter, her movement slower than before, but her smile just as bright. When Jack walked in carrying a modest bouquet of daisies and carnations, her face lit up even more. Jack, you shouldn't have, she said, touching her hand to her chest. The flowers were simple but beautiful, just like their friendship. He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. Saw them at the market. Thought they might brighten up the place. He placed them carefully on the counter, and Marge immediately started arranging them in an old glass vase she kept under the counter. "How are you feeling today?" Jack asked, settling onto his usual stool. His rough exterior had softened over the past weeks, though his eyes still carried that haunted look she'd noticed since the day they met. "Better every day," Marge replied, adjusting the flowers just so. "Doctor says I'm healing well, though I still get tired easily." She paused, studying his face. "But something's weighing on you today, isn't it?" Jack's shoulders slumped slightly. He ran a hand through his graying hair, looking down at the counter. "Been thinking about my daughter," he said quietly. "Sarah." His voice caught on the name as if he hadn't said it aloud in a long time. Marge placed her hand gently on his arm. "Tell me about her." "Haven't seen her in years," Jack admitted. "She was just a teenager when I chose the gang over my family. Her mother raised her right, thank God. She's got a good job now, lives about 2 hours from here." He pulled out his wallet and showed Marge a worn photograph of a young woman with his eyes and determined chin. "She's beautiful," Marge said softly. "Do you ever talk to her?" Jack shook his head. "Tried calling once about a year ago. She hung up." His voice was rough with emotion. "Can't blame her. I wasn't there when she needed me. Missed her graduation, her wedding, everything that mattered." Marge poured him a cup of coffee, adding just the right amount of cream, the way he liked it. "You know, Jack, it's never too late to try again. Sometimes the hardest step is just reaching out. What if she doesn't want to hear from me?" His fingers wrapped tightly around the coffee cup. "Then at least you'll know you tried," Marge said gently. "But what if she does? What if she's been waiting for you to prove you've changed?" She patted his hand. "Life's too short to live with what-ifs, Jack. I learned that when I lost my Henry." Jack sat quietly for a long moment, sipping his coffee. The morning regulars came and went, but Marge gave him the space he needed to think. Finally, he straightened up. "You're right," he said, his voice stronger. "I need to try again. Maybe I could write her a letter first. Tell her about the changes I'm making, about the shelter work." "That's a wonderful idea," Marge beamed. "Sometimes it's easier to find the right words on paper." Jack stood up, determination clear in his stance. "I'm going to do it. Today." He reached across the counter and squeezed Marge's hand. "Thank you, Marge, for everything." "Just promise me one thing," she said, her eyes twinkling. "When you write that letter, tell her about the flowers you brought to this old waitress today. Show her the man you're becoming." Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I promise." He turned towards the door, then paused. "I'll let you know how it goes." Jack sat in his truck, parked outside his motorcycle repair shop, his weathered hands gripping his cell phone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dashboard as he stared at his daughter's number on the screen. Marge's encouraging words from yesterday echoed in his mind. "Just be honest, Jack. That's all any child wants from their parent." His thick fingers trembled slightly as he pressed the call button. Each ring made his heart pound harder until... "Hello?" His daughter's voice was guarded, careful. "Sarah?" Jack's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. It's your dad." A long pause followed. Jack could hear her breathing on the other end. "I didn't expect to hear from you," she said finally, her tone neutral but not hostile. "I know." Jack rubbed his face with his free hand. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about everything, about how I messed up being your father." "That's putting it mildly," Sarah replied, but there was a hint of something else in her voice now. Curiosity, perhaps. "I was wrong," Jack continued, the words tumbling out. "All those years with the angels, choosing that life over being there for you and your mom. I was wrong. I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. More than you'll ever know." He told her about Marge then, about taking the bullet meant for him, about how her kindness had shown him what really mattered in life. His voice grew thick with emotion as he described the changes he was trying to make. "There's this shelter where I've been volunteering," he explained, "helping kids who remind me of myself at that age, trying to show them there's a better path." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "That doesn't sound like the father I remember," she said softly. "I'm not him anymore, at least I'm trying not to be." Jack gripped the steering wheel with his free hand. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but—" "Dad," Sarah interrupted, her voice gentler now. "I can't promise anything, but maybe we could meet for coffee sometime. Just to talk." Jack's heart swelled. "I'd like that. Whatever time you're comfortable with." They talked for a few more minutes, making tentative plans to meet the following week. When the call ended, Jack sat in his truck for a long moment, overwhelmed by emotion. The drive to the diner seemed shorter than usual, his spirit lighter than it had been in years. The familiar bell chimed as he pushed open the door, and he found Marge behind the counter, carefully arranging cups and saucers. "Jack!" Her face lit up with a warm smile. "You look different today. Happier." He slid onto his usual stool, unable to keep the smile from his face. "I called Sarah," he said. "My daughter." Marge set down the cup she was holding, giving him her full attention. Her eyes were bright with interest. "She's willing to meet for coffee next week," Jack continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Just to talk, but it's more than I deserve." "Oh, Jack." Marge reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. "Everyone deserves a chance to make things right. I'm so proud of you for taking that first step." Jack squeezed her hand back, grateful for her unwavering support. "I couldn't have done it without you, Marge. You showed me that change is possible, that it's never too late to try to be better." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the grimy windows of Jack's motorcycle repair shop. The familiar smell of oil and metal hung in the air as he worked on an old Harley, his hands steady despite the years that had passed. The radio played softly in the background, country music mixing with the gentle clink of tools against metal. The bell above the door chimed. Jack didn't look up right away, assuming it was another customer. "Be with you in a minute," he called out, wiping his hands on a nearby rag. "Take your time, Hammer. We've got all day." Jack's shoulders tensed at the sound of that voice. He knew it well. Tommy the Snake Peterson, a former associate from his Hells Angels days. Slowly, Jack turned around to face them. Tommy wasn't alone. Two other men flanked him, their leather jackets bearing patches Jack recognized all too well. Their expressions were hard, calculated, like predators sizing up their prey. "Shop's closed," Jack said firmly, his voice low and controlled. He gripped the wrench in his hand a little tighter. Tommy laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "That's not very friendly, Hammer, especially after all we've been through together." He walked around the shop, running his finger along a workbench. "Nice little setup you've got here. Real respectable." "What do you want, Tommy?" "Word is you're going soft," Tommy said, his smile fading. "Volunteering at shelters, helping vets with their bikes. Even heard you're trying to make nice with that daughter of yours." He shook his head. "But you seem to have forgotten something important." The other two men moved to block the exit. Jack's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "I haven't forgotten anything. That life's behind me." Tommy's face hardened. "See, that's where you're wrong. You don't just walk away from family, Hammer, and you definitely don't walk away from the things you know." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. We've been patient, but that patience is running out. You've got secrets that could hurt a lot of people, people who aren't as forgiving as me." Jack stood his ground, though his heart was pounding. "I'm not interested in causing trouble. I just want to live my life." "Your life?" Tommy laughed again, harder this time. "Your life stopped being just yours the day you patched in. You think playing guardian angel to some waitress and helping troubled kids is going to wash away what you did?" The mention of Marge made Jack's blood run cold. Tommy noticed the reaction and smiled. "Nice lady, that Marge. Real shame about what happened to her. Taking a bullet for you?" Tommy shook his head. "Would be terrible if something else happened to her because you forgot who your real friends are." Jack's knuckles went white around the wrench. "Leave her out of this." "That's up to you, old friend." Tommy headed for the door, his companions following. At the threshold, he turned back. "Remember who you are, Hammer. You can play pretend all you want, but we'll always be there to remind you of the truth." The bell chimed again as they left, leaving Jack alone in his shop. His hands were shaking as he set the wrench down. He slumped against the workbench, the weight of their threats pressing down on him like a physical thing. The radio continued to play softly, but Jack barely heard it. His mind was racing, filled with images of Marge in the hospital, of his daughter finally starting to trust him again, of everything he'd built beginning to crumble. He'd thought he could outrun his past, but now it was clear. It had finally caught up with him. The morning sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as Jack sat at his usual spot at the counter. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten as he struggled with the weight of what he needed to tell Marge. She moved behind the counter with her usual grace, though slower now since the shooting, refilling cups and chatting with the regulars. When the breakfast rush died down, Marge noticed Jack's troubled expression. She grabbed the coffee pot and made her way over to him. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," she said, filling his cup with fresh coffee. Jack wrapped his calloused hands around the warm mug. "They came to my shop yesterday," he said quietly, his voice rough with worry. "My old associates." Marge set down the coffee pot and leaned against the counter. "Tell me everything," she said, her eyes filled with concern, but not fear. "They made it clear they're not going away." Jack's jaw tightened. "I thought I could just walk away from that life, start fresh, but they won't let me." He looked up at Marge, his eyes haunted. "I can't let anyone else get hurt because of my past. Not again. Not like you did." Marge reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. "Jack Malone, you listen to me. Running away from your problems won't solve them. They'll just follow you wherever you go." "What else can I do?" Jack's voice cracked slightly. "These aren't the kind of people you can reason with." "Maybe not," Marge agreed, "but they're the kind of people who respect strength. Real strength." She squeezed his hand. "You've been running from your past for so long. Maybe it's time to turn around and face it." Jack stared into his coffee cup. "I'm not that person anymore, Marge. The one who could handle this kind of thing." "No, you're better," she said firmly. "The old Jack would have solved this with his fists. But you're different now. You've got something worth fighting for. Your new life, your daughter, this community." The diner had grown quiet, the regulars pretending not to listen but hanging on every word. They'd all come to care about Jack in their own way over the past weeks. "What if they don't back down?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marge straightened up, wincing slightly from her still healing wound. "Then you face that too. But you face it as the man you are now, not the man you used to be." Jack sat in silence for a long moment, then slowly nodded. He stood up, leaving money on the counter for his coffee. "You're right," he said, his voice stronger now. I need to end this one way or another." Marge watched as he headed toward the door. "Jack," she called out, making him turn. "Come back safe." He gave her a small smile, more genuine than any she'd seen from him before. "I will. I've got promises to keep now." As Jack walked out into the morning sun, Marge watched through the window as he mounted his motorcycle. She said a silent prayer, hoping she'd done the right thing in encouraging him to face his demons. The rumble of his motorcycle faded into the distance as he rode away, leaving Marge and the diner regulars to wait and hope for his safe return. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot of the abandoned warehouse. Jack's boots crunched on loose gravel as he approached the three men waiting for him. His old gang brothers, if you could call them that now, stood with their arms crossed, their leather jackets gleaming in the early light. "Been a while, Hammer," said Mickey, the leader of the group. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Jack kept his distance, his hands visible at his sides. "This ends today, Mickey. I'm not that person anymore." "That's cute," Mickey sneered, taking a step forward. "You think you can just walk away? Start fresh? The things you did for us, those don't just disappear." The tension crackled between them like electricity. Jack's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm telling you to leave me, and everyone around me, alone." Mickey's hand twitched near his jacket pocket. Jack recognized the motion. He'd seen it countless times before. The familiar surge of adrenaline coursed through his veins. But this time it was different. He thought of Marge, of her kindness, of the bullet she took for him. "You pull that gun," Jack said quietly, "and you better be ready to use it, because if you don't finish me, I'll make sure everyone knows about Tucson." Mickey's face went pale. The other two men shifted uncomfortably. "You wouldn't dare," Mickey growled. "Try me." Jack's voice was steel. "I've got nothing left to lose, Mickey, but you've got plenty. Walk away now, and we both get to keep our secrets." For a moment, nobody moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Mickey's hand slowly moved away from his jacket. "This isn't over, Hammer." "Yes, it is." Jack stood his ground. "Unless you want the feds knowing exactly what happened that night, every detail." Mickey spat on the ground and turned away. His two companions followed, their motorcycles roaring to life moments later. The sound echoed off the warehouse walls until it faded into the distance. Half an hour later, Jack pushed open the door to the diner. His hands were still shaking. The familiar bell chimed above his head, and the smell of coffee and fresh pie wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Marge looked up from behind the counter, her face etched with concern. "Jack, are you all right?" He slumped onto his usual stool, running a trembling hand through his gray hair. "I don't know, Marge. I really don't know." She poured him a cup of coffee without asking, sliding it across the counter. The ceramic mug clinked softly against the worn surface. "They're gone for now," he said quietly, staring into the dark liquid. "But I'm scared, Marge. First time in years I've been truly scared." His voice cracked slightly. "Not for me, for you, for everyone here. I brought this danger into your lives." Marge reached across the counter and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and steady. "Fear means you've got something worth losing, Jack. Something worth protecting." She squeezed his hand gently. "That's not weakness. That's growth." Jack looked up, meeting her kind eyes. The morning light streaming through the diner windows caught the silver in her hair, making it shine like a halo. In that moment, he understood why she'd taken that bullet for him. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is care about someone else more than yourself. The morning sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn counter where Marge sat, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She wasn't working today, doctor's orders, but she couldn't stay away from the place that felt more like home than her empty house. Jack walked in, the bell above the door chiming softly. His broad shoulders seemed weighed down, but his eyes brightened when he saw Marge. He'd been checking on her every day, bringing groceries, fixing things around her house, and just keeping her company. "You should be resting at home," he said, sliding onto the stool next to her. Marge smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "I am resting, just in a different place." She studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "You look tired, Jack." He ran a hand through his graying hair. "Been busy at the shelter. Those kids, they remind me of myself at that age. All that anger, nowhere good to put it." He paused, fiddling with a paper napkin. "Got 3 of them interested in learning motorcycle repair. Figure if I can teach them a trade, maybe they'll stay out of the trouble I found." "That's wonderful," Marge said, reaching over to pat his hand. "You're making a real difference." Jack's expression darkened. "Yeah, when I'm not looking over my shoulder for ghosts from my past." He lowered his voice. "Got another warning yesterday. They're not backing down, Marge." "And neither should you," she said firmly, though her hand trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "Running only gives them more power over you. I can't risk anyone else getting hurt because of me. You already took a bullet." "And I'd do it again," Marge interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Not because I want to get shot, mind you, but because I believe in you, Jack Malone. I see the good man you're becoming." Jack's eyes grew misty. "I don't deserve your faith in me." "That's not how faith works," Marge said with a soft chuckle. "It's not about deserving. It's about believing in possibilities." She shifted on her stool, wincing slightly as her healing wound protested. "Those kids at the shelter? They need you. The community needs you. Running away won't solve anything." Jack was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his clasped hands. "I've been thinking about what you said, about facing things head on." He looked up at her. Maybe it's time I went to the police, told them everything I know about the old days. Clean slate, fresh start." Marge's face lit up. "Now that sounds like the Jack Malone I know is in there." "It won't be easy," he warned. "There might be consequences." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Marge replied. "But you don't have to face them alone." Jack nodded slowly, his shoulders straightening as if a weight was lifting. "You're right. No more running. Time to face my demons." "Just promise me one thing," Marge said, her expression serious. "Be careful. I didn't take that bullet just to have you do something foolish." A ghost of a smile crossed Jack's face. "Yes, ma'am." He stood up, determination replacing the weariness in his eyes. "I've got some calls to make. People I need to talk to." "Go on then," Marge said, smiling. "Do what needs to be done." As Jack headed for the door, he turned back. "Thank you, Marge, for everything." She watched him leave, pride and worry mingling in her heart. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least he was finally walking it. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm rectangles of light across the checkered floor. Marge moved between tables with her usual grace, though anyone watching closely might notice she took more breaks than before. Her recovery had been steady, but the bullet wound had left its mark. "Here's your coffee, Earl," she said, setting down a steaming mug in front of one of her regulars. "Black as midnight, just how you like it." Earl, a retired postman with silver hair and kind eyes, smiled up at her. "Thanks, Marge. How are you holding up these days?" "Oh, you know me. she replied, patting his shoulder. "Can't keep this old girl down for long." But as she turned to head back to the counter, something wasn't right. The room seemed to tilt sideways, and her chest tightened like a vice. The coffee pot slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The crash drew every eye in the diner, but it was the sight of Marge clutching her chest that made people jump to their feet. Her face had gone pale, and she stumbled, catching herself on the edge of a table. "Marge!" Earl called out, rising from his seat. Jack, who had been sitting at his usual spot at the counter, was already moving. He reached her just as her knees buckled, catching her before she hit the ground. Her breathing came in short, painful gasps. "Someone call an ambulance!" Jack's voice boomed through the diner. He cradled Marge gently, his rough hands trembling as he supported her head. "Stay with me, Marge. Just breathe, nice and easy." The diner erupted in controlled chaos. Sally, the young waitress, was already on the phone with 911, speaking quickly but clearly. The regulars cleared space, moving tables and chairs to make room for the paramedics. Through it all, Jack didn't move from Marge's side. "Jack," Marge whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm causing such a fuss." "Don't you dare apologize," he said, his gruff voice thick with emotion. "You just focus on breathing, you hear me?" The minutes until the ambulance arrived felt like hours. Jack could feel Marge's pulse racing beneath his fingers, too fast and irregular. When the paramedics finally burst through the door, their efficiency was both reassuring and terrifying. They worked quickly, attaching monitors and speaking in clipped professional tones. Jack stepped back, his hands clenched into helpless fists as they loaded Marge onto a stretcher. The sight of her looking so small and fragile under the harsh fluorescent lights made his stomach turn. At the hospital, Jack paced the waiting room like a caged animal. Every time the emergency room doors swung open, his head snapped up, hoping for news. The guilt that had become his constant companion since the shooting grew heavier with each passing minute. "This is my fault," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his gray hair. "If I hadn't brought my troubles to her door—" He couldn't finish the thought. Hours crawled by. Other people came and went, regulars from the diner, checking in with worried faces. They brought coffee that grew cold in styrofoam cups, offered words of comfort that Jack barely heard. His mind kept replaying that moment in the diner when she'd taken the bullet meant for him, wondering if this was the price of her sacrifice, finally coming due. When a doctor finally appeared, Jack stood so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. The news was a mix of relief and worry. Marge was stable but critical. Her heart had been weakened by the stress of her previous injury, and now they would have to wait and see. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor cast harsh shadows across Jack's weathered face as he sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair outside Marge's room. His large, calloused hands were clasped together, knuckles white with tension. The steady beeping of medical equipment from nearby rooms created a rhythm that matched his racing heart. He hadn't left the hospital since they brought her in. The nurses had offered him coffee, which sat untouched and cold beside him. His mind kept replaying everything Marge had done for him, taking that bullet, believing in him when no one else would, encouraging him to reconnect with his daughter. Each memory felt like a weight on his chest. "Mr. Malone?" A nurse approached him quietly. "You can see her now." Jack stood up, his joints stiff from sitting too long. Inside the room, Marge looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets. The sight of her like this, pale and connected to various machines, made his throat tight. He pulled up a chair next to her bed and sat down heavily. "I'm so sorry, Marge," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "This is all my fault. If I hadn't brought my troubles to your door—" The quiet of the room was broken only by the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've been sitting out there, thinking about everything you've done for me. Nobody's ever believed in me like you have. Nobody's ever—" He paused, swallowing hard. "Nobody's ever cared enough to take a bullet for me." Through the window, the night sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Jack hadn't slept, but he didn't feel tired. His mind was too full of memories. Marge's kind smile as she served him coffee, her gentle encouragement when he talked about his daughter, her unwavering faith in his ability to change. "I promise you, Marge," he said softly, "I'm gonna make this right. Whatever it takes." As morning light began to filter through the window, Marge's eyes fluttered open. She blinked slowly, taking in her surroundings before her gaze settled on Jack. A weak smile touched her lips. "Jack," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You look terrible." Despite everything, Jack couldn't help but chuckle. Even now, she was thinking of others. "Look who's talking," he said gently. "I'm okay," she assured him, though her voice was thin and tired. "Just need a little rest, that's all." Jack could see the effort it took for her to speak, could see how the color hadn't returned to her cheeks. His hands tightened on the bed rail. "Listen, Marge, I'm gonna help you through this. Whatever you need, rides to doctor's appointments, someone to run errands, anything, I'm gonna be there." Marge's smile widened slightly. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Jack interrupted firmly. "You've done more for me than anyone ever has. Let me do this for you." His voice softened. "Please." She studied his face for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Okay, Jack," she whispered. "Okay." The morning sun now filled the room with warm light, and Jack felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about paying back a debt anymore. This was about being there for someone who had seen the good in him when he couldn't see it himself. The autumn sun filtered through the curtains of Marge's modest living room, casting warm patches of light across the worn carpet. Jack sat in the faded armchair beside her couch, his large frame seeming out of place among the delicate doilies and family photos that decorated the space. Marge lay propped up against several pillows, a handmade quilt tucked around her legs. "You don't have to check on me every day, you know," Marge said, her voice tired but warm. "I'm not going anywhere." Jack's weathered hands clasped together in his lap. "After what happened at the diner," he shook his head, "I can't take any chances. Not with you." Marge reached for her teacup on the side table, but Jack was quicker. He handed it to her carefully, making sure she had a good grip before letting go. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the space between them. "My heart's been through worse," she said, taking a small sip. "Remember what I told you about losing Henry? Now that was something." Jack nodded, remembering their conversations about her late husband. "Still, the doctor said you need rest. And with everything that's happening—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "You mean with your old associates?" Marge's eyes, though tired, remained sharp and knowing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as Jack considered his words. "They won't let go, Marge. As long as they're out there, everyone I care about is at risk." His voice grew quiet. "Everyone you care about, too." Marge set her teacup down with a gentle clink. "You know what I think about running from problems, Jack Malone." "I'm not running," he said, leaning forward in his chair. "Not anymore. That's what I came to tell you." Outside, a car drove past, its shadow briefly dancing across the wall. Jack watched it go, his shoulders tense until it disappeared. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days," he continued, "about what you did for me, about everything that's happened since." He rubbed his palms against his jeans, a nervous gesture that seemed at odds with his tough exterior. "I can't keep living with one foot in my past and one in my future. It's time to end this." Marge studied his face, noting the determination in his eyes. "You're going to confront them?" I have to. For good this time. Jack stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. I've got some contacts from the old days who owe me favors. People who can help make this right, legally this time. When he turned back to Marge, his expression had softened. I want to be the kind of man who deserves what you did for him, the kind of man who makes things right. A smile spread across Marge's face, gentle and proud. You already are that man, Jack. You just needed to believe it yourself. Jack returned to his seat, his movements careful and deliberate. I'm going to fix this, Marge. No more looking over my shoulder. No more wondering if today's the day they come back. He reached out and patted her hand gently. You focus on getting better. Let me handle the rest. Marge's smile widened, and she gave his rough hand a squeeze. Now that sounds like the Jack Malone I've come to know. The afternoon light was starting to fade, casting long shadows across the room. Jack stood up, adjusting his leather jacket. I'll have someone keep an eye on the house while I'm gone, just to be safe. You do what you need to do, Marge said, her voice full of quiet confidence. I'll be right here when you're done. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot where Jack stood, waiting. His hands weren't shaking anymore, and his heart beat steady and strong. 3 motorcycles roared in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Jack didn't move, didn't flinch. He watched as his old enemies pulled up, their bikes forming a half circle around him. You wanted to talk, Hammer? The leader, a burly man with a graying beard named Snake, dismounted his bike. Ain't much left to say. Jack squared his shoulders, his voice calm and clear. Actually, there is. This ends today. Snake laughed, but it was hollow. The other 2 men flanked him, their leather vests bearing the familiar patches that had once meant everything to Jack. You see, Jack continued, taking a step forward, I'm not that man anymore. The one you knew, the one you could threaten, he's gone. People don't change, Snake spat. Once an angel, always an angel. That's where you're wrong. Jack's voice carried across the lot, strong and sure. I found something worth living for, worth changing for, and I won't let you take that away. Snake's face twisted. You gone soft, Hammer. That old waitress made you weak. No, Jack said, shaking his head. She showed me what real strength is. Taking that bullet for me, that's courage, that's strength, and I'm done running from my past. The tension crackled between them. Snake's hands clenched into fists, but Jack didn't back down. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the realization that the man before them wasn't the same one they'd known. You come near me, near Marge, near anyone I care about again. Jack's voice dropped low, carrying the weight of absolute conviction, and you'll find out just how much stronger I've become. Snake studied him for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he spat on the ground. You ain't worth the trouble anymore, Hammer. You want out? Fine. You're out. But don't come crawling back when your new life falls apart. It won't, Jack said simply, because unlike before, I've got something real to fight for. The 3 men mounted their bikes, engines roaring to life. Snake gave Jack one last look, a mixture of disgust and something else, perhaps respect, before they rode away, leaving nothing but dust and the fading sound of engines. Jack waited until they were gone before letting out a long breath. He got into his truck and drove straight to the diner, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Marge was sitting at her usual spot behind the counter when he walked in. Her face lit up at the sight of him, though concern creased her brow. Jack, are you all right? He crossed the diner in long strides and, without hesitation, wrapped her in a gentle hug. It's over, Marge. Really over. She pulled back, her eyes searching his face. They're gone? They're gone, he confirmed, smiling. They won't be back. I'm free. Tears welled in Marge's eyes as she hugged him again. I'm so proud of you, Jack. So proud. They stayed like that for a moment, the morning sun streaming through the diner windows, casting warm light across them both. The regular customers at their tables smiled, watching the scene unfold. In that moment, Jack felt the last weight of his past finally lift from his shoulders. The morning sun streamed through Marge's kitchen window, casting warm light across her small dining table. She sat there, wrapped in her favorite purple cardigan, hands cupped around a steaming mug of tea. Her face had regained some of its color, and though she moved slower these days, her eyes still sparkled with their familiar warmth. Jack walked in through the back door, carrying a paper bag filled with fresh pastries from the bakery down the street. Thought you might want something sweet with your morning tea, he said, placing the bag on the table. Marge's face lit up. Oh, Jack, you shouldn't have. She peeked inside the bag and smiled. Are these Mrs. Peterson's cinnamon rolls? The very same. Jack pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Figure you deserve a treat, especially since you're looking better today. They shared a comfortable silence as Marge broke off pieces of the warm pastry. Jack watched her, noticing how her hands trembled slightly, less than they had the week before. The doctors had said she was improving, but they all knew she needed to take things slow. I saw Tommy at the shelter yesterday, Jack said, breaking the silence. Remember that kid I told you about? The one who reminded me of myself at that age? Marge nodded, dabbing at her mouth with a napkin. The one with the motorcycle fascination? That's him. Well, he's been coming by the shop after school. I've been teaching him the basics of motorcycle maintenance. Jack's voice softened. It feels good, you know? Helping these kids see there's a better path than the one I took. You're doing wonderful work, Jack, Marge said, reaching across the table to pat his hand. Those young people need someone who understands what they're going through. Later that afternoon, they moved to the living room. Marge settled into her favorite armchair, while Jack took his usual spot on the couch. The room was filled with photos of her children and memories of a life well lived. Remember the first time you came into the diner? Marge asked, adjusting her cardigan. You looked so angry at the world. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. I was. Thought everyone was out to get me. He paused, his expression growing serious. You were the only one who wasn't scared of me. Just kept serving me coffee with that smile of yours, asking how my day was going. Everyone deserves kindness, Jack, even tough bikers who scowl at their pancakes. Her eyes twinkled with amusement. You changed my life, Marge, Jack said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Not just by taking that bullet. Long before that. You showed me what it means to be good, truly good, without expecting anything in return. Marge smiled, her eyes misting over. Oh, Jack, you always had it in you. You just needed someone to believe in you. They sat together as the afternoon light began to fade, sharing stories about the diner, about Jack's progress with the troubled youth at the shelter, and about the simple joy of finding friendship in unexpected places. The room felt warm with memories and gratitude, a testament to the power of second chances and unconditional kindness. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Jack's motorcycle shop as he wiped his hands on a greasy rag. His heart pounded against his chest as he watched a silver sedan pull into the parking lot. Through the windshield, he could see his daughter's face, a face he hadn't seen in person for years. She stepped out of the car, her movements hesitant. Jack noticed how much she looked like her mother, though her eyes were all his. She wore a simple blue blouse and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. For a moment, they just stood there, separated by a few yards of concrete and years of pain. Hi, Dad, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's throat felt tight. "Hey, sweetheart." He took a step forward, then stopped, unsure if he should approach. "Thanks for coming." She nodded, crossing her arms across her chest, a protective gesture he recognized all too well. "Your phone calls. They seemed different. You seemed different." Jack gestured to a couple of chairs near the shop entrance. "Would you like to sit?" They settled into the chairs, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know those words aren't enough, but I need you to hear them. I'm sorry for not being there, for choosing that life over you, for all the birthdays and school events I missed, for making you feel like you weren't important enough." His daughter's eyes welled with tears. "Do you know how many times I needed you? How many times I waited for you to show up?" "I do now," Jack said, his own eyes growing moist. "And it kills me. I was selfish. I was stupid. I thought I was living this big, important life, but I was just running away from the most important thing I had, being your father." She wiped at her eyes. "What changed?" Jack told her about Marge, about the bullet she took for him, about how her kindness had shown him what real strength looked like. "She made me see that I needed to face my mistakes, not run from them. That includes making things right with you, if you'll let me." His daughter was quiet for a long moment. "I can't pretend the past didn't happen," she said finally. "I wouldn't want you to. But," she continued, meeting his eyes, "I don't want to carry this anger anymore, and I miss having a dad." Jack's heart swelled. "I'd like to try to be one, a real one this time." She nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. "I'd like that too." They talked for hours, catching up on lost time. She told him about her job as a teacher, her boyfriend, her dreams for the future. When they finally hugged goodbye, it felt like the first step on a long road to healing. Later that afternoon, Jack rushed to the diner to tell Marge the news. He found her at her usual spot behind the counter, filling salt shakers. "She came," he said, unable to keep the joy from his voice. "We talked. Really talked." Marge's face lit up with a warm smile. "Oh, Jack, tell me everything." As he recounted the meeting, Marge's eyes sparkled with pride. When he finished, she reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. "You did good, Jack," she said softly. "You did real good." Jack squeezed her hand back, grateful for the woman who had helped him find his way back to his daughter, back to himself. The morning light filtered through the hospital room window, casting long shadows across Marge's pale face. Jack sat in his usual chair, his large hands wrapped around one of hers. She seemed smaller somehow, more fragile than ever before, the sheets almost swallowing her thin frame. "The doctors say—" Jack's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "They say there's not much more they can do." Marge's eyes fluttered open, and despite her weakness, she managed a warm smile. "It's okay, Jack. I've lived a good life." "Don't talk like that," he said, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "You're gonna get better. You have to." She shook her head slowly. "We both know that's not true, but I want you to know something." She paused to catch her breath, each word seeming to cost her precious energy. "I'm so proud of you, Jack Malone." Tears welled up in Jack's eyes. He blinked them back, but one escaped anyway, rolling down his weathered cheek. "I wouldn't be here without you, Marge. You saved more than just my life that day." "You saved yourself," she whispered. "I just gave you a little push in the right direction." She smiled again, though it was tinged with pain. "Promise me something?" Anything, Jack said without hesitation. Keep helping those kids at the shelter. Keep being the man I know you can be. Her voice was getting weaker. And don't forget to visit your daughter. Jack nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The door opened quietly, and several people from the diner filed in. Regulars who'd known Marge for years, staff members who'd worked alongside her, even the old cook who'd hired her decades ago. They gathered around her bed, some crying softly, others trying to smile through their tears. Someone started humming Amazing Grace, and others joined in. Marge's eyes closed, but her smile remained. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thank you all for being my family. Jack held her hand tighter as her breathing became more labored. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed to grow brighter, bathing her face in a gentle glow. I'm not afraid, she said, her eyes opening one last time to look at Jack. Remember that, okay? I'm not afraid at all. Her grip on Jack's hand loosened, and her chest rose and fell one final time. The room fell silent, except for the soft sobs of those gathered around her bed. Jack brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, his tears finally flowing freely. The nurse came in and checked her vitals, then quietly announced the time of death. One by one, the people in the room said their goodbyes, touching Marge's hand or kissing her forehead before leaving. Jack was the last to leave, standing at the doorway for a long moment, looking back at the woman who had changed his life so completely. Goodbye, Marge, he whispered, and thank you. As he walked down the hospital corridor, his steps heavy with grief, he could almost hear her voice telling him to stand tall, to keep going, to remember that there was always hope. Even now, in death, she was helping him find his way. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was the kind of sunset Marge would have loved, Jack thought. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled. The world seemed both infinitely sadder and more beautiful than it had been just hours before. The morning sun cast long shadows across the empty diner's parking lot as Jack stood before the familiar building. His weathered hands gripped a stack of papers, the final documents establishing the Marge Thompson Memorial Foundation. The weight of them felt right, like something she would have wanted. Inside, the regulars had already gathered, filling the familiar booths and counter seats. Their faces showed the same mix of grief and hope that Jack felt in his heart. Tom, the old veteran who'd been coming here for 20 years, raised his coffee cup in greeting. Big day, Jack? Tom said softly. Jack nodded, setting the papers down on the counter. She always talked about helping those kids at the shelter, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Figured it was time to make it official. The diner had become more than just a place to eat. In the months since Marge's passing, it had transformed into a gathering spot for people wanting to carry on her legacy of kindness. The regulars had pitched in, helping Jack navigate the complicated process of setting up a charitable foundation. We've got the first round of funding secured, Jack explained to the gathered crowd. Enough to start scholarship programs for kids trying to get their lives back on track. His hands trembled slightly as he spread out the papers. And the diner, well, we're keeping it exactly as she would have wanted. A safe place for anyone who needs it. Sarah, one of the younger waitresses who'd worked alongside Marge for years, wiped tears from her eyes. She would have loved this, Jack, especially the part about the scholarships. Jack remembered how Marge had always slipped extra food to the hungry teenagers who wandered in, never asking for anything in return. She'd seen past their tough exteriors to the hurt underneath, just like she'd done with him. The foundation would focus on what Marge did best, believing in people when they couldn't believe in themselves. They'd provide education opportunities, job training, and mentorship programs. Jack had already lined up several local businesses willing to offer apprenticeships. "Got the first group of kids starting next week," Jack said, pulling out some photographs. 5 of them, all trying to turn their lives around. He passed around pictures of young faces, each one carrying the same look he'd once worn, that mixture of defiance and desperate hope. The diner's bell chimed as more people filed in. Business owners, community leaders, and former troubled youth who'd found their way thanks to Marge's quiet guidance. They'd all come to support the foundation's launch. Jack moved behind the counter, where Marge had stood so many times before. The familiar position gave him strength as he addressed the crowd. "Marge saved more than just my life that day," he said. "She showed me what it means to live for something bigger than yourself." The room grew quiet as Jack continued, his voice steady despite the emotion. "This foundation isn't just about giving kids a second chance. It's about teaching them what Marge taught me, that everyone deserves kindness, everyone can change, and it's never too late to start over." Later that morning, Jack stepped outside into the crisp air. The foundation's new sign gleamed in the sunlight, Marge's name written in elegant letters. Below it, the words she'd lived by. "Everyone deserves a fresh start." The diner's neon lights reflected off the polished chrome of his motorcycle, and Jack felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. Marge's final gift hadn't just been saving his life. It had been showing him how to live it. Standing there, Jack looked up at the bright blue sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and promise. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting warm patches of light across the worn counter where Jack now sat. 6 months had passed since Marge's death, but her presence still lingered in every corner of the place. The coffee pot gurgled softly in the background, filling the air with its familiar aroma. Jack adjusted his leather jacket, now adorned with a small pin bearing the logo of Marge's Foundation for Second Chances. The organization had grown faster than he'd expected, touching more lives than he could count. Today, like most mornings, he started his day here, in the place where everything had changed. "Morning, Jack," called out Betty, one of the new waitresses. She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, just the way Marge used to. "The youth center called. They said 3 more kids signed up for the mentoring program yesterday." Jack nodded, a small smile tugging at his weathered face. "That's good news. Real good news." He wrapped his hands around the warm mug, remembering how Marge would do the same thing during their early morning talks. The diner had become more than just a restaurant. Every Thursday evening, the community gathered here for what they called Marge's meetings, a time when people could come together, share their struggles, and find support. Tonight was one of those nights, and already the regulars were starting to filter in. Old Tom, a veteran who'd been coming to the diner for decades, settled into his usual booth. "Hey, Hammer," he called out, using Jack's old nickname, though it carried a different meaning now. "Heard your daughter's coming to help with the foundation?" "Yeah," Jack replied, his eyes brightening. "She's moving here next month. Says she wants to be part of what we're building." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. His relationship with his daughter had grown stronger with each passing month. Another gift from Marge's influence. The morning crowd began to fill the diner, a mix of familiar faces and newcomers. Jack watched as people greeted each other, shared stories, and carried on Marge's tradition of making everyone feel welcome. The walls now displayed photos of community events and newspaper clippings about the foundation's work, including one showing Jack speaking at a youth rehabilitation center. Sarah, a teenage girl who'd been one of the foundation's first success stories, walked in wearing her new college sweatshirt. She caught Jack's eye and smiled, giving him a quick wave before joining her friends at a corner table. 6 months ago, she'd been on the verge of dropping out of school. Now she was headed to college with a full scholarship from the foundation. The diner's bell chimed as more people entered. A young couple with their child, new to town, looked around uncertainly. Betty immediately went to greet them, showing the same warmth that Marge had always shown to strangers. Jack watched as they were quickly absorbed into the friendly atmosphere, their tension visibly melting away. He stood up, leaving his usual tip under the coffee cup, and walked toward the door. Pausing at the threshold, he looked back at the scene before him. The sunlight caught the small plaque near the counter that read, "Marge's Place, where everyone gets a second chance." The words were simple, just like Marge had been, but they carried a weight that had changed countless lives, including his own. A group of young people walked past him into the diner, their laughter mixing with the gentle hum of conversation inside. They were part of the new generation that would never know Marge personally, but they would know her through the legacy she'd left behind, a legacy of kindness, second chances, and unconditional love that continued to transform their small town, one person at a time. Jack sat at the counter of the diner, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. 6 months had passed since Marge's passing, but her presence still lingered in every corner of the place. He gazed at the spot where she used to stand, pad in hand, greeting customers with that warm smile of hers. The memory of that fateful night when she took the bullet meant for him still felt fresh, but the sharp pain of guilt had softened into something different, a deep sense of purpose. "More coffee, Mr. Malone?" asked Sarah, the new waitress. She was young, probably in her 20s, and tried her best to fill Marge's shoes. "Thanks, sweetheart," Jack replied, his voice gentler than it used to be. The old gruffness was gone, replaced by a warmth that reminded him of how Marge had changed him. The foundation he'd started in her name was growing. Just last week, they'd helped 3 more kids get off the streets and into trade schools. His daughter Jenny had even started volunteering there, teaching art classes to troubled teens. The thought brought a smile to his face, something that used to be rare, but now came naturally. The bell above the door chimed, and Tommy, one of the shelter kids, walked in. The teenager had been one of the Foundation's first success stories. 6 months ago, he'd been sleeping rough and running with a dangerous crowd. Now he was apprenticing at Jack's motorcycle shop, learning the trade. "Morning, Jack," Tommy said, sliding onto the stool next to him. "Got those parts we needed for the Harley." Jack nodded, noting how the kid's eyes were clear and bright, no longer haunted by the shadows of the streets. It reminded him of his own transformation. The old Jack, the hammer, would have walked right past someone like Tommy, maybe even intimidated him for fun. But Marge had shown him a different way. His phone buzzed, a text from Jenny about Sunday dinner. Their weekly family meals had become a tradition, something he never thought possible during those dark years when she wouldn't even speak to him. Another gift from Marge, really. She'd encouraged him to reach out, to keep trying even when it seemed hopeless. The morning regulars filed in, each nodding to Jack with respect. He was no longer the scary ex-biker they avoided. He was just Jack now, the guy who helped their kids, fixed their bikes, and kept Marge's spirit of kindness alive. Looking around the diner, Jack could see her influence everywhere. The free meals they still provided to those who couldn't pay. The bulletin board filled with job postings and community announcements. The way people looked out for each other, just like she had. He reached into his pocket and touched the small angel pendant Marge had always worn. Jenny had found it among her things and insisted he keep it. It served as a reminder of the promise he'd made to himself and to Marge, to live a life worthy of her sacrifice. Tommy was talking about his plans for technical college, his eyes bright with hope for the future. Jack listened, remembering how Marge had always made time to really hear people, to make them feel valued. "You know," Jack said quietly, more to himself than to Tommy, Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest acts of kindness. He looked at the empty spot behind the counter where Marge used to stand. And sometimes they come from the biggest acts of love. He straightened his shoulders, feeling the weight of his responsibility, not as a burden, but as a gift. Each day was another chance to honor what Marge had done for him, another opportunity to pass her kindness forward. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Old photos of Marge lined the walls, her warm smile frozen in time. The place was packed, with people spilling out onto the sidewalk. Some wore their Sunday best, others came in work clothes, but everyone carried the same look of reverence in their eyes. Jack stood at the front, his weathered hands gripping the small podium someone had brought in. His daughter sat in the front row, offering silent support. The leather vest he once wore with such pride had been replaced by a clean button-down shirt, and his eyes, once hard with anger, now shimmered with emotion. "Marge," he began, his voice rough with feeling, "wasn't just a waitress. She was the heart of this place, of this town." He paused, collecting himself. "When I first walked in here, I was a different man, angry, lost, but Marge..." He smiled, remembering. "She'd serve me coffee with a smile, even when I didn't deserve one." The regulars nodded, many wiping away tears. They remembered how she'd remember their orders, their stories, their troubles. How she'd slip extra pie to kids who looked hungry, or leave encouraging notes with the check. "She took a bullet for me," Jack continued, his voice cracking. "But that wasn't the only way she saved my life. Every day, with every kind word and gentle reminder, she showed me what it meant to be human again." From the back, someone called out, "Remember how she'd save the day-old muffins for the shelter?" Others joined in, sharing their memories. "She helped me get my GED," one young man added. "Tutored me right here at the counter." Jack nodded, gesturing to the Foundation's new sign hanging proudly on the wall. The Marge Memorial Foundation isn't just about helping people. It's about continuing what she started. Every kid we help, every life we touch, that's Marge's legacy living on. The diner's bell chimed as more people entered, squeezing into whatever space they could find. Some were former gang members Jack had helped reform, standing shoulder to shoulder with local business owners and church ladies. "Look around," Jack said, his voice stronger now. "Look at all of us, together in one room. That's what Marge did. She saw past our differences, past our mistakes. She saw the good in everyone, even when we couldn't see it ourselves." He touched the counter where she used to stand, her favorite spot where she'd lean and chat with customers. This diner isn't just a place to eat. It's a reminder that one person's kindness can change everything, that love and forgiveness are stronger than hate. That's what Marge taught me, taught all of us. The morning light caught the new plaque on the wall. Marge's place, where everyone deserves a second chance. Below it hung a photo of her, caught mid-laugh, her eyes twinkling with joy. Jack watched as people began sharing their own stories, hugging, crying, laughing. The diner buzzed with life, just as it had when Marge worked there. Young families sat in booths where old-timers used to perch, new friendships formed over coffee and pie, and the spirit of community she'd fostered continued to grow. He moved behind the counter, where he now spent most mornings, serving coffee and listening to troubles, just as she had done. A young woman with tired eyes and a worried expression came in, and Jack found himself reaching for a coffee pot, ready to offer a kind word and a sympathetic ear. The legacy of kindness Marge had started flowed through every cup of coffee served, every smile shared, every life touched. In this way, she lived on, her light continuing to shine through the lives of those she'd touched. The early morning light filtered through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the worn counter where Jack sat. his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, just the way Marge used to serve it to him. The familiar aroma brought a smile to his face as memories washed over him. The diner was quiet at this hour, peaceful in a way that made reflection natural. Pictures of Marge now adorned the walls, her warm smile captured forever in frames that told the story of her life. There she was at the counter, serving plates with that infectious grin. Another showed her surrounded by regulars during the Christmas party last year. Each image held a piece of her spirit. Jack took a slow sip of his coffee, remembering how she'd always known exactly when he needed a refill, even before he asked. The quiet moments they'd shared here had changed him more than all his years on the road ever had. Her sacrifice had given him more than just a second chance at life. It had shown him what it meant to truly live for others. The morning sunlight caught the gleam of his leather jacket, hanging on the coat rack near the door. It was the same one he'd worn that fateful night, now worn soft with age. But unlike before, it no longer carried the weight of his past. Instead, it reminded him of transformation, of the power of kindness to reshape a life. The foundation he'd started in Marge's name was thriving. Just yesterday, they'd helped 3 more kids get into trade school, giving them the chance to build better lives. The shelter where he volunteered was full of stories of change and hope, each one a tribute to the woman who'd believed in second chances. His daughter visited regularly now, bringing his grandkids to the diner for Sunday breakfast. They sat in the same booth where he and Marge had shared so many conversations, and sometimes, when the light hit just right, he could almost see Marge there, nodding in approval. The regulars had become family, keeping Marge's spirit alive in their daily rituals. Old Bill still ordered his eggs over easy, telling anyone who'd listen about how Marge had once driven him to the hospital when his car wouldn't start. Sarah, the young waitress who'd taken over Marge's shifts, had learned to pour coffee with the same gentle care, treating each customer as someone special. Jack ran his hand along the smooth counter, feeling the decades of stories embedded in its surface. This place had been more than just a diner. It had been Marge's heart, beating strong with love for her community. Now it was his responsibility to keep that heart beating, to ensure her legacy lived on in every cup of coffee served, every kind word spoken, every life touched. The morning regulars would be arriving soon. Jack could already hear their cars pulling into the parking lot, their voices carrying through the door. He straightened up, feeling Marge's presence beside him, guiding him still. The coffee pot was full, the griddle was hot, and there were people who needed a warm smile and a friendly word. Just like Marge had taught him, sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. As he stood to greet the first customers of the day, Jack felt at peace, knowing he was exactly where he was meant to be, continuing the work of the woman who had saved not just his life, but his soul. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.